Hello, everybody, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to be here today. My name is Anthony Amboy. I oversee Student Equity and Achievement Program and Guided Pathways Grant Program here at the Chancellor's Office, and I want to welcome you to Pathways to Equity Learning Series, Learn, Act, Change. Um, Before we get started, I wanted to make sure that we do a couple housekeeping things. And so to get started, I would like to say that um, closed captioning is going to be available. So if you need live captions, they're going to be enabled, but you can actually enable them within your user interface for Zoom. And we have a question and answer section available instead of a comment section. And we may have time for questions at the end of this webinar. So if you have any questions, please be sure to go over to that Q&A tab within the Zoom user interface, and we'll be able to answer questions for you. Some of you said hello, so hello back. We're also actively looking at the chat. And so once again, welcome, welcome, welcome. Next slide, please. So a little bit of an agenda for you today regarding this. This is the inaugural webinar for the learning series, and this is the first webinar of the Learn portion of the Pathways to Equity learning series. And so once again, for those of you just joining us, my name is Anthony Amboy. I oversee Student Equity and Achievement Program and Guided Pathways. We are going to be having first an executive overview by Vice Chancellor Rebecca Ruan-O'Shaughnessy, and then an introduction of the timeline and pathways to equity by Michael Q, who is the Dean of Educational Services and Support. Next slide, please. After those particular elements of the agenda, we're going to have a couple more things: how Pathways to Equity Learn, Act, Change intends to fulfill a need in our system, the webinars to come and other events within our system, and a Vision Resource Center tutorial, followed by a Q&A session, and the next steps that are going to be coming after this webinar. And with all those things said, once again, I want to just do one more welcome to all of you, and we hope that you'll find this to be helpful, and especially in your equity efforts, engaging with students and helping students on your campuses. And with that being said, next slide, please. I would like to introduce Vice Chancellor Ruan-O'Shaughnessy.
Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. My name is Rebecca Ruan-O'Shaughnessy, and I'm the Vice Chancellor for Educational Services and Support at the Chancellor's Office. Again, I'm excited to kick off the Pathways to Equity Learning Series and really to walk the equity journey together in the months to come with you. All things start with our North Star, the vision for success, right? Our vision is to make sure that top 100% of the students, meaning students from all backgrounds, succeed in reaching their goals and achieve social and economic advancement for them and for their families. As anchor of social and economic recovery and stability for the communities we serve, California community colleges are not just in the education business, we're in the prosperity business. That requires us to adjust the lens in which we speak about our work and evaluate success. Our job is not done when we finish teaching and or providing services to students. Ultimately, we're successful only if our students are successful, meaning they and their families are better off when they leave us than when they join us, right? So all of that boils down to the vision for success goals and commitments on the slide. We have looked at this slide fairly regularly. When we unpack the numbers, we see that although we have made continuous progress toward vision for success goals, equity gaps continue to persist. So the notion of a rising tide lifts all the boats doesn't work, right? That's why in the era of student success for all, equity is still at the heart of our vision. In the commitment section, you don't see a separate equity commitment because equity is not separate. And it's what we do, and it should be embedded in every commitment. But what does that exactly look like operationally? Well, right, that depends. It depends on our role as institutions and our roles as individuals. Equity doesn't live in a vacuum or frankly on a pedestal, right? It's grounded in initiatives and also, most importantly, grounded in structure, assumptions, and beliefs that we carry when we do our work. That's why we're excited to embark on this learning journey with all of you and create the space to share, learn, evaluate, and experiment, and really bring additional intensity and focus to equity in the next phase of our collective work. Next slide, please. Here's a slide highlighting the system priorities. I don't think any of this is a surprise to you. You will see a lot of activities and touch points in these areas from us in the coming year, and many are already in motion. We'll also touch on some of these priority areas in the follow-up webinars that my colleagues will talk about a little bit more later on, and we'll also connect you to other system events in this area throughout our journey together. As I mentioned earlier, equity is not just grounded in carrying out the initiatives. It's also grounded in structure, assumptions, and beliefs. So the devil is in the details. It's about implementing with fidelity and implementation to not just things, what's in writing, either in regulations or in guidance memos, but also in the spirit behind the writing. The key themes I want us to all take away from this webinar and keep in mind as we continue this journey are: one, student-centered design, right? When in doubt, think from our students' perspectives. Our commitment is to own student performance. So the question should always be, how is this benefiting the students? I really appreciate my colleague, Dr. Lundy Wagner's continued push for us when we design programs. The questions are around, what is the value add of this design, right? Are we doing better? Like I think about my area, which is student services side of the house. Are we doing better in terms of designing the program, right? Than just give straight cash to students as a hypothesis, right? So, but that really questioned the way we think about, what we need to do and our role in all the work. And if there's a silver lining to the pandemic, is it created that momentum and the passion from all of us to say that, all hands are on deck. Let's roll up our sleeves, look at all the things in our toolbox to serve the needs of the most vulnerable students. And from that, we've learned a lot, right? We saw a lot of the flexibility that's helpful to the institutions and to funding to provide that differentiated support for our students, right? We see regulations that through the executive order process, we see that we need to make permanent to create more flexibilities for the students. So those are some of the examples we think about when we design, when we look forward to the next phase, right? We think about the importance of distance education in the continuity of education, right? And we see the importance of universal design in serving students across the continuum, especially serving the importance of serving students with disabilities. We see all of that in those moments, right? That really unify us, and that we have the tremendous opportunity to innovate, to bring additional shifts and changes to our system to better support our students. And the second theme that I want us to take away from is really bring that intentionality of equity in everything we do, which means connecting data, qualitative and quantitative, based on student experiences to outcome, right? How do we facilitate inquiry to allow us to continuously to improve the way we serve our students, right? Students have changed. The society has changed, right? The workplace has changed. So should the way we serve our students. And also, how do we inform design and policies and programs and reporting to connect those data points to the outcome, right? And then how do we establish rigorous evaluation of our system reforms and priorities, right? We make assumptions. We do experiment, right? We need a continuous improvement process to help us learn what has worked, what hasn't worked, or what kind of combination that could be innovative to bring a new level of outcome, right? And then in the end, how do we then also work together to ensure accurate and timely data are available? And I will say also the caveat there is the importance of how do we evaluate when the data is good enough for us to move forward, right? So we don't get stuck on, we don't have that real piece of data, right? To really make a decision. So we're not hold off, right? In terms of what we have in terms of our data points. And the last bit is the importance of continuous improvement and our learning agenda, right? And we will, obviously, my colleague will tell you what we expect in terms of reporting, for example, right, for the equity plan. But this is a learning agenda for all of us. This is not for compliance. This is a learning and planning tool and self-reflection tool for all of us to see, okay, we've done a lot, right? We've done the hard work, but what are the areas for improvement, right? Again, like I said, kind of looking at the things, all the things we've done, really understand what has worked, what hasn't worked, or what probably has worked. And let's look at the combinations of different things and let's learn from one another, right? To create another new level of innovation. So those are, and then we want to, what we want to do from the system level is to help also release some of your burdens, right? So when you're looking at our streamlined reporting pilot, that's what we're trying to do. We want to make very clear the data points that we really care about at a system level. And we want to provide that flexibility and scaffolding support for you to leverage your local data, right, to make these hypotheses and start to have those rapid experimentation. So that's really what we hope to see and what we want to kind of walk the journey with you. So without further ado, I want to kind of hand it over to my colleague, Michael Keowitz, to kind of go over some of the additional details.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for outlining kind of our environment and what we're going to be approaching, not only for this year, but for years to come. So, but I want to say good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Keowitz. I'm a Dean in Educational Services and Support, and I oversee Student Equity and Achievement Program, Guided Pathways, Distance Education, and Educational Technology. But before I start talking about our Pathways to Equity Learning Series, I wanted to acknowledge all the great work that has been done by all of you to help students stay on their academic path and journey in these 18 months or so. We've gone through the start of a pandemic, social unrest, an entire system going virtual. And we learned a lot from that. We've shown that we can adapt quickly. We've shown that we can embrace change. But not only do we have that ability to change, but the capability to do so while keeping students at the center. We learned a lot, but we also learned that our most vulnerable populations were impacted the most by the pandemic. And that the distance education that we rolled out raised new equity issues that we need to deal with. So yes, there is a lot on all of our plates. There's not only the work that we've been trying to do, but the new work that's ahead of us. So this really brought us to what can we do to help the system, which allows us to come to the Learn, Act, Change series. Next slide. So as you can see here, our intent is to try to have something that is continuous. And the genesis of this idea came about when we were planning and designing our Pathways to Equity conference last year. We received so many good proposals for workshops and webinars, but we didn't have the vehicles or the capacity in that virtual conference to accommodate all of them. So we immediately began to start planning and thinking of a way to ensure that this information that we need to share, because things are changing so rapidly in our environment for our students. So we have to learn from what was going on and then rapidly prototype to see what is going to work for what we're looking at in the future. So yes, we thought that if we did something like this, where the first part of our academic year, we would do webinars. That's that learn portion that you see. And then we're gonna go to moving into the spring with our ACT, which is our virtual conference, and then culminating in our regional in-person convenings in the Change event, right? All of this really, like Rebecca had said, is for us to begin to continue to learn and to continue to talk about what is going to work for our students around equity, so that the equity plan becomes a planning document and not just a compliance document. Next slide, please. So let's start with the learn component of this series. It's going to be a monthly webinar series. We're going to have sessions on data, on how to keep equity at the center of guided pathways design, and some active learning components as well. But this is really about sharing information. Like, what should we be doing and what could we do? Next slide, please. This next event is our ACT event, which is our online conference, right? This is about networking. This is about bringing folks together, about sharing successes and challenges, and making sure that we are allowing each other to learn from all of the things that we've done to respond to our students and their needs. And so folks do not have to recreate the wheel. It's a time for us to talk about what worked, what didn't work, and why. Next slide, please. And finally, these events are going to culminate in our in-person regional convenings that is called the Change event. And the whole idea behind this is, if something that we learned in the webinars or something that hit us or sparked our interest in what we needed to do on our campus at the conference, then we could take this to the next level and work on a regional training or seminar that brings together colleagues and facilitators to be able to make that change that they wanted to see on their campus, to create that artifact. So we are truly learning and building and then acting and doing something so that we can begin to start making that structural change that we want to make for our campuses and for our students. So this entire series, really, I'm excited about, right? It's a great opportunity for us as a system and for our students. It's important now more than ever, I think, that we create vehicles that give us the opportunity to learn from each other. We need to focus on equitable outcomes for our students, and we need to make equity the focus of our changes. Continuous engagement like this can help with continuous improvement, which then leads to creating a more student-centered environment. So with that, I am going to pass the baton over to my colleague, Anthony Amboy, so that he can talk to you a little bit more about our Pathways to Equity Learning series in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Keowitz, and thank you, Vice Chancellor Ron O'Shaughnessy, for your comments today. I hope that for everybody listening and everyone involved, that was helpful in understanding like our framework for moving forward with Pathways to Equity Learning series. And so I wanted to go forward and discuss the process of how Pathways to Equity intends to fulfill a need in our system, and how we want to transform what was once a conference into something more and something greater, and something that involves colleges and students alike. Next slide, please. And so the need that we've established with our conversations with stakeholders, with those involved, is the idea of creating statewide communities of continuous learning. And in order to do that, we really want to kind of create this cycle in which we continue moving forward and cultivating a culture of collaboration, continuous improvement, student-centered design, and data-driven decision-making, as my colleagues have stated. And this entire series for the webinar portion is intended to meet those gaps. We have 6 webinars with specific topics to strengthen our focus on equity, in addition to all of the guidance and webinars that we provide already. We want to provide differentiated support to strengthen local efforts in advancing student equity, and really show the breadth of knowledge that is throughout the entire system. And we are hoping that by the end of this webinar series, viewers will have a better understanding of what is available to them to ensure equity for their student populations across their systems, and ensure that they have the resources, the community, and encouragement from the CO to do what is necessary for the college to make things happen quickly and without fear of a non-compliance or retribution for taking actions. We really want to encourage the process of being bold, And we really also want to emphasize that this process is a work in progress. Many of the webinars here that you're going to be seeing are a work in progress, and we're going to be reaching out to colleges, to those that want to be involved, to help us do better with this process. Nothing is 100% set in stone yet in terms of participants, and we would like to make sure to emphasize that going forward. Next slide, please. And so we'll also provide support for equity plans to assist with the submission, hoping to build that idea of a communication pipeline. That idea of, if you need help, please come to us. We want colleges to be successful in their transformation of their equity plan into an active learning tool, or an active learning tool, in terms of developing it as more than a compliance document. And we want to make sure that we're providing guidance across the state, and this webinar series is how we're going to do it. So continuous improvement is something that's in our plans. It's how we hope to build on each other's successes to work for a better California community college system. And that is the entire Learn, Act, Change format. Open communication between colleges to share challenges and successes, continuous improvement without fear of noncompliance, and courage to take bold actions and innovations for equity. Next slide, please. And so what we are trying to do as a system is share our learning and collaborate with each other to break down our structural inequities and really live up to the promise of student success, because students do not have time to wait. Next slide, please. And so with that being said, we're going to get a little bit more in depth about the learning portion of this series. The webinars to come, specifically related to the content and when they're going to be occurring. Next slide. So you're already here in the Introduction to the Pathways to Active Learning series, and that is the start. Next month, we're going to be working with colleges to build out the Guided Pathways Strengthening Our Focus on Equity webinar. It's to inform attendees where Guided Pathways has been, where it is now, and where it is going. Representatives from community colleges are going to present on their experiences with various aspects of Guided Pathways, and really we're providing them the space to be able to share openly and to be able to answer questions and also build community with each other. Next slide, please. In terms of thinking about data and how we have student-centered design and thinking about our implementation efforts, Dr. Valerie Lundy, Vice Chancellor Valerie Lundy-Wagner, will be working with us to help understand the Guided Pathways key performance indicators, thinking about the problems that we're trying to solve and how do we know. And so thinking about how we leverage data to advance the vision for success goals that we have, and how colleges can make local data experiments powerful to advance equitable student outcomes. Next slide, please. And the next 4 webinars after that are related to ensuring equity, or ensuring learning using the Guided Pathways framework. And ensuring learning is the 4th pillar of Guided Pathways. In terms of thinking about how we want to engage with that, it's the active learning framework. And so using a combination of learning environment, learning teams, learning materials and curriculum, and learning outcomes data, we plan on using these processes to be able to better understand the way we can really work together and collaboratively to develop a better active learning process throughout the entire state. Next slide, please. And so we have 4 webinars. 3 of them are rapid fire. We have one right at the end of October, the beginning of November, and then the end of November with respect to that month of December. And so thinking about these particular webinars, Learning Teams focuses on how successful equity efforts and Guided Pathways implementation in various community college systems requires everyone on board, and how student equity is a task of all faculty and staff rather than only specific staff on community college campuses. And so we're hoping to provide resources for both students and faculty to create learning teams on their campuses as well. With learning outcomes data, we're going to be focusing on how we can highlight the current reality of equity in our system through data while simultaneously elevating student voices on campus. When we think about learning environment, We hope to provide examples and resources to ensure that colleges provide an equitable atmosphere for the students, in person or online, especially with all the adjustments that we've had to make. This webinar gives community colleges the space to present and discuss how every subject area and student environment of a college has a role in ensuring equity student learning. And finally, that leads to learning materials and curriculum. So thinking about discussing the need on the need and shining a light on curriculum resources to create a more equitable environment. Community college representatives presenting in this webinar will focus on the ways that the current learning curriculum hinders and supports inclusive environments and active learning, and provides, they're going to have a space to provide their experiences there as well. I want to make sure to emphasize that many of these webinars are still in progress. We are actively seeking participants to help us in the development, the colleges involved, and the representation that we need, especially when it comes to thinking about DEI efforts, the idea of continuous improvement, really making sure that we have student-centered design, and thinking about equity as the key focus and the normalized process that we want going forward. And so we're going to be seeking guidance as much as we're hoping to provide guidance as well. Next slide, please. And so that's the learn portion of this series. As we design and as we move forward, equity is the main focus, and it's what has always been the focus when we focused on designing these webinars. The process of these webinars is not yet complete, and once again, I want to emphasize that we're hoping to be able to work with colleges in developing these webinars in a manner that they see fit. So if your college is interested, we will be hoping to hear from you moving forward. And with that being said, I also want to make sure that we have some time within these webinars to highlight events across our system. Next slide, please. If you have any events that you would like to share out across the state, please feel free to contact us, and we have contact information at the end of this slideshow, because we want to be able to provide more opportunities for community colleges to work together, or to be able to see what other colleges are doing. From what we've gathered in terms of webinars to come right now, there's a Chancellor's Office System webinar tomorrow regarding teaching and learning paradigm shift, expert to agility. Colegas presents Courageous Latinx Leadership, which is on September 2nd, and Equitable Placement and Completion webinar series. And that is going to be on September 8th from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And so if any of these interest you, please be sure to look them up and be sure to register as well. Next slide, please. And with all of that being said, all of these webinar resources, Pathways to Equity, the whole process, all of that being said, we need a place for community colleges to be able to reach out to us and to collaborate with us in a way that's meaningful, that doesn't get buried in emails, that we can be able to communicate with each other openly and be able to provide like a central data hub. And for us, that we found that to be the Vision Resource Center. The Vision Resource Center is a resource that has currently roughly around 113,000 users. And a lot of colleges are fully integrated in terms of how they interact online with their colleges, with their college and the Vision Resource Center. And so we'd like to provide a tutorial for those of you that are not familiar with the Vision Resource Center and what it provides, and also to assist in that process. And so I wanted to make sure to set aside time for that. In our time really thinking about student-centered design and thinking about being intentionally equity focused, to be able to communicate actively and openly is something that we hope to continue to reinforce going forward. And that's why we've decided to have the Vision Resource Center as a key data hub. So next slide, please. So for many of you that are not familiar with the Vision Resource Center, for logging in, you generally just have to go to this particular website, visionresourcecenter.cccco.edu/login. After you enter your email, if your college is fully integrated, it will go to a separate portal it will log you in using all of that information that you already have available. And then if you're not sure if your college is integrated, there's also a simple login as well, and that will allow you to kind of be able to log in and create an account and get familiarized with the VRC. Next slide, please. In terms of thinking about how you can get involved with Pathways to Equity, it would be, you have to go into communities. If you can see in this little image here, you have to hover over communities, you can't press it. And then from there, you have to go, you have to find, after you go into communities, you go to all communities and you have to find the CCC webinars, conferences, and events community. And that is where our event is going to be located. You browse communities and then you hit join community, and that will allow you to have instant access to that community. Next slide, please. After you have joined CCC conferences, webinars, and events, you will be able to find Pathways to Equity. So you just click on Pathways to Equity folder to see what we're talking about. Next slide, please. And within the Pathways to Equity area, you're going to see a Learn folder, an Act folder, and a Change folder. Again, I want to emphasize we're still in the process of building out many of the webinars and conferences that we're advertising today, and we're actively seeking your involvement. And we would encourage you to visit this particular area of the site. We're working on being very active in this community and hoping to see you there. So you can browse discussion posts and questions and other areas like that. Next slide, please. And you can create your own conversations. If you have any questions related to Pathways to Equity Conference, how you want to get involved, areas in which you would like to discuss or see discussed within this webinar series, or within the conference or within the in-person meetings, please feel free to post. And next slide, please. And after you've registered for Vision Resource Center, you'll also receive a daily email that lists any discussions, any updates, postings, and things like that. And so going forward, that's generally how we hope to be able to interact with you. Aside from being able to contact us through the Chancellor's Office and through our divisions, we also want to make sure that we have this place for you to be able to communicate your ideas related to Pathways to Equity. If you want to be involved, if you want to become a part of this process, this is the place in which we'll be waiting. Next slide, please. And so with that all being said, we want to kind of get into a question and answer session about the Pathways to Equity and thinking about that going forward, and any questions that you may have. We want to make sure that we set aside time for a question and answer session. And so that will be led by Michael Tran, analyst for Student Equity and Achievement Program and Guided Pathways. Michael Tran, I defer to you.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Tran, and I am so excited and a little nervous to be here this morning. This is such a great and friendly crowd that we have today. So again, I just want to thank you for joining us today and taking time out and sharing your morning with us. So let's see here. We do have a few questions lined up. I believe that we still can take questions in the Q&A portion. So folks, please feel free to send those our way. But in the meantime, there are a few that we can just kick off for our panelists, Anthony, Michael, and Rebecca. So thank you folks for joining us. So here's a question. One that was sent early on was, well, yeah, folks appreciated what y'all had to say today, but will it be too late to incorporate this information into my student equity plan, which is due next year? But before we get into that, I was wondering, Michael, you did speak a little bit about what the student equity plan is. Can you give us just a quick rundown in case folks were able to not join us at the very beginning, and then we can get into the question.
Sure. We're looking at, trying to have a nice continuous process where I think we're engaging folks about what can be done on the campus and with our disproportionately impacted groups, so that we're actively working that equity plan throughout the year, not just when it's due, right, every 3 years. So we want to make it an active document. We are looking from a compliance perspective. The equity plan is due every 3 years. This year it's due in 2022. So we are looking at the fall, probably end of November is where the dates that we're looking at to kind of have that equity plan due. We'll come out shortly with a formal announcement about those dates. But we're also working on a template as well as we are designing the equity plan right now. And we'll get that out to folks in the next few months.
Thank you so much, Michael. And just to follow up with that, do colleges necessarily have to wait until they receive a template from the Chancellor's office to begin the planning and discussions for the student equity plan?
No, they don't. I mean, if you look at Education Code, 78220, which defines, what we're going to be asking for from a compliance perspective, that's where we're going to be looking at. So there won't be much different in what we're asking currently in the equity plan. What we're trying to do is trying to align it more with streamlined reporting, meaning that we want, how do we get all of our equity work focused on the goals of the vision for success? So you can begin working on that immediately without the template. The template is just kind of a good tool to make sure that you're on track. But I think the folks know out there that have been working this daily, weekly, monthly for years now can continue that same work, because we won't be asking anything outside of that.
Right on, Michael. Thank you so much. We have another question I wanted to hand to whoever's ready to answer. So this question, I'm going to read it from what I see here. In discussions around student equity, besides resources to mental health on campus, how do you create space for students with disabilities related to mental health? This person said that as an educator, they tried to receive information on how to engage students with disabilities. Is anybody ready? Would anybody like to address that real quick?
I can take a stab at it, right? So students with disabilities obviously is a population on campus that we really need to pay attention to and dedicate resources to, right? So we have a very powerful kind of DSPS group that's really supporting that effort. But what they do, what they have been working really hard in supporting students is not enough, right? We need local leadership. We need universal design principle, right? Apply to our structure, to the entire kind of continuum of care that we need to provide to students, so we can make sure that in the classroom we have an inclusive environment to support students who either identify themselves with students with disabilities or students who just need help, right? Students with learning variability. So how do we really provide that continuous support for students, both on the structural side of it, right, as well as the focus support for students who really need accommodations, is really the goal that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. We really appreciate that.
And I'm so sorry. And I think there was a mention also of mental health. And I'm sorry, I'm just trying to piece things together. So mental health, obviously there's resources, right, supporting mental health, but we know that's not enough, right? So it's really about connecting, creating an ecosystem for students that are in need. So we're thinking about the new basic needs center and the resources, the emergency fundings, all of these resources to really to provide that safety net for students really across all basic needs. How do we better connect students to that support network on campus institutionally? And then more importantly also, right, the public mental health and mental health system. How do we also create that partnership for our students so we can make sure we have affordability, we have quality, we have access to these students, right? And it's not just a one-time episodic response, but also a long-term, right, long-term care for our students, so we can make sure that they're succeeding at the moment of need, right? So it's an emergency response, as well as to make sure that they're successful, they're persisting throughout their entire college journey.
Right on. Thank you so much. And I also really appreciate that question as well, because one of the things we're really trying to convey and create a culture of is to share where we're struggling, right? Where we want to learn more, where we don't want folks to feel isolated, that they're the only ones really trying to tackle the inequities that exist for our students. So definitely thank you so much, and really opening up the conversation. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of questions coming in. So one person asked, what does EDC stand for? That's what I typed in the chat. That just stands for education code. So the education code 78220 was what Michael had mentioned. Um, Here is a question, and maybe Anthony, you might want to tackle this one. How can faculty assess equity in their classrooms and curriculum? Are there tools available to help with that? And it'll be open for anyone else that wants to tackle it.
What was it? One more time.
Yes. How can faculty assess equity in their classrooms and curriculum? Are there tools available to help with that?
So I come from a classroom background. I've taught at Sherbrooke College, and I taught at Los Medanos College, shout out. And in terms of thinking about equity in the classroom, one of the things that I was told when I had first started teaching was, if you're already thinking about it, you're already a part of the solution. So that's always a great place to start. In terms of supplemental resources associated with that, I actually received a lot more resources looking at the Vision Resource Center. In terms of thinking about equity design, there's actually a lot of resources there for you, not just related to Pathways to Equity Conference, but also related to things like guided pathways, student-centered equity, and also thinking about those processes. And there's usually links to webinars and discussion posts associated with that. And so I would refer you to the Vision Resource Center for those resources in particular, and to really get yourself familiar with the Vision Resource Center. Actually, I wasn't necessarily familiar with the Vision Resource Center until my time in the classroom was too late. And so I hope that going forward, you consider using the VRC for those resources as well.
Right on. Thank you so much, Anthony. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, in addition, I wanted to share that we have a lot of system partners that are doing a lot of webinars on classroom climate and so forth. So I think we need to keep a lookout for a lot of the different webinars that our system partners are doing on working on this. This is one of those key things that we discovered we weren't doing with a lot of our equity plans, and it's something that was called out in our call to action, that we want to be able to look at our classroom climate. So a lot of folks out here in the system are doing some really good work out there, sharing what their experiences are and how we can move forward.
And if I may add, so in the 4-part series that Anthony talked about, this is also kind of the place where we want to explore more in detail with you on. So also I would like to kind of refer you to also the ASCCC website. They've done a lot of work in that area, and then we will work with them closely in designing of the 4-part learning series. So it's really about how do we look at students holistically and bring in these traditionally kind of separate, right, curriculum design and student support into those learning teams and into other parts of our kind of equitable learning experience designed for students. So it's kind of to say more to come, and stay tuned.
Right on. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Rebecca. I have another one right here. I'm just going to read it verbatim. It's from Meredith. And she says, I love the idea of utilizing guided pathways and leveraging the existing program to reach students and improve equity. Curious how to change the mindset at an institution. I feel like guided pathways was set up on the instruction side of the house, but kind of left out student services and discussions of equity. Any ideas on how to get a seat at the table and ensure student needs, voices, and successes brought back into changing and rolling out guided pathways fully? Thank you. Great question, Meredith. And I could read it again too if y'all need.
Well, I think, guided pathways, is is something that can be changed for each particular college, right? And it can be used and developed at their particular college. But really, it's a whole campus effort, right? And I think everybody needs to have a seat at the table. It may have begun in student services or begun in instruction, but it doesn't matter because the entire journey of that student will encompass just-in-time supports for all, throughout that journey. So it'll be needed both on the instruction side and the student services side. So it is definitely encouraged that you not only try to get a seat at the table, but you include students importantly in that design work, right? We cannot do this in a vacuum, right? We are designing this for students to get the obstacles out of the way so that they can be successful and complete their educational goals. So not only do we need to have, both all sides at the campus at the table when we do guided pathways design, but we need to ensure that we have students at the table as well.
And I would like to add that there's not one guided pathways table, right? Every table should be a guided pathways table, right? Guided pathways is the organizing framework to get to that equitable outcome for our students, right? So how do we think about connecting the work we have when we are interacting with students, which is really every moment when they're on campus? How do we design classrooms that work for all students rather than having a classroom or having a structure that doesn't work and then providing all the added support, right, to provide support to the students, right, in spite of the system. So how do we kind of think about, and I remember one of my staff recently kind of have that analogy of like, why are we having lots of buckets to catch the leaking, to catch the water, right, rather than fixing the roof? That's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to do both and, right? How do we really provide that structural support? And then how do we provide that specialized high touch service, right? So all these conversations can take place depending on the initiatives and efforts we all are working on. So I think the question really here is how do we turn every conversation into a guided pathways conversation?
Right on. Thank you so much, folks. And I wanted just to, this isn't a question, but this was something that I did see in the chat that I think is one of the things we want to do is share what we have out there, because we acknowledge this. Our colleges, our faculty, our administrators, our students, you all have the answers, right? So what we're trying to do is create this space where all of this information can be shared and exchanged. So I just want to give a shout out to Renee Alvarez, who stated at San Jose City College, we are rolling out an equity dashboard where faculty can analyze disaggregated student data in each of their courses and determine which student populations are disproportionately impacted and adjust accordingly in the classroom. So I definitely just wanted to take a shout out, a moment to give space and share that, yes, these answers are out there. Y'all got them. We're just here to try to facilitate and convene, you feel me, and get everyone together and have these conversations going. If we could get colleges to talk to each other and share, hey, this is what we're struggling with. We saw that you've been doing this. We saw that you were successful here. Can we meet up? Can we talk? Can we learn from each other? So I appreciate folks already taking that lead in the Q&A. Okay, so let's see here. Here's another question. What advice, and I'm gonna leave this one open to whoever wants to take it and is ready. What advice would you have for someone who wants to create more equity at their college, but they may be new to their role, or they may not have specifically formal training in the area of equity?
I will start with, we're leading the nation in doing this equity work. This is hard stuff and we don't have the answers, right? So you don't need a formal training. I was not trained to be assistant vice chancellor, right? We all come with a wealth of knowledge and our passion. And I think an important piece there is really, which is the learning journey that we're all, right, embarking on, right? So it's really about being courageous and take chances and experiment. There's nothing wrong with experimenting, just trying things out to figure out if it works. If it doesn't work, again, like a different combination of things that might work, right? And then also when in doubt, always fall back to student-centered design, right? How would the students feel? If I make this change, would that hurt students? Who will it benefit? Who would it hurt, right? And then I will always go back again to my colleague, Dr. Lundy Wagner. It's like, is it better? Is whatever I'm doing here better than just giving students a thing, right? If there's a thing that they can just take with them, whatever we create in terms of design of the program has to be better than that. Otherwise, let's just give students the thing, what they need, right? To help them succeed.
Let's do one more question.
All right. Okay. Let's leave it at this one. Going back to students and keeping students at the center. Can someone please provide an example where of a case study of students that are guiding and leading guided pathways at an institution?
I can tell you that I know there's some good work being done at Santa Monica Community College, where their students are integrally involved in the design of guided pathways, both in all of their on-campus groups. So, and I apologize because I can't cite the report, but there is, I think it is a Center for Urban Education, USC, that may have done a report with Santa Monica College and their work with student engagement in guided pathways.
And then I will also kind
okay.
of like to add that this is an area that we are working very closely with the Student Senate on, right? Student enfranchisement is critical. So how do we bring student not just participation, but leadership in conversations, right? So we're making changes. We're trying to kind of bring, again, more students into one, right? As a first step, a chancellor's office, a participatory governance committees. How do we bring student voice into these conversations? So in terms of student-centered design, is not what we think students will experience, but is actually how students will experience, right? So that will be based on qualitative data, but also from quantitative data, right? To really bring out those student experience. So that's an area definitely that we can do better on, and we will.
And with that being said, I want to thank Michael Tran, Dean Keowitz. I want to thank Vice Chancellor Bruno Shaughnessy for answering these Q&As. If we could bring up the slide deck for the second to last slide here. Again, this process is something that we're hoping to keep students at the center. We're attempting to do our best to get colleges involved, and we would like to have your involvement. So the next steps, we would hope that you visit the Vision Resource Center today. Continue the conversation online in the Vision Resource Center. The Pathways to Equity 2021, that should say 2022 group is active. Modules and interactive learning opportunities are available for various subjects, including the Vision for Success and Guided Pathways. On September 1st, tomorrow, registration for the next webinar, Guided Pathways, Strengthen our Focus on Equity, is going live. And so please, capacity is limited. Please register as soon as you get that email, especially if you want to be a part of seeing which colleges are get involved in the process. And your input is needed. Please help us find the right speakers for Pathways to Equity virtual conference. And if there are any topics you want to see us discuss at the CO about Pathways to Equity, about system webinars, and about the VRC, please contact us and visit us online through our Pathways to Equity portal within the Vision Resource Center. Next slide, please. And with that being said, I would like to thank you for coming to the Pathways to Equity Learning Series, Learn, Act, Change, with the introductory webinar for the Learn series. Please stay in touch at visionresourcecenter.cccco.edu. Please contact us at cccpathwaystoequity.com, and please visit that website to see what events are going on. And I want to make sure that everybody is aware these webinars will be available online, and slides presented today will be reviewed for accessibility before being posted to the Vision Resource Center. And we are looking for other ways to ensure that everyone has the ability to see these webinars, whether it is through a streaming service or online on another portal. So please stay tuned for that. We are planning on getting these slides live on September 10th, and we will have slides going forward as well. So once again, thank you so much for attending. I'd like to thank all of our presenters today, and I would like to thank you for being a part of this process. We hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful day.